In this short lecture, I want to talk a little bit more about first principles and property investment. So this is as much a little guidance on how to quiz or query property deals and test assumptions. When you ask the right questions and you test assumptions thoroughly, then you can reason from there and you can either have confidence in that deal or not. So asking the right questions is pretty important. And we talked earlier about the basically the very first principles of property, i.e., buy low, sell high, and always get a good net cash return. That's not necessarily the case. If you're chasing high capital growth, you might forgo cash return just to possess the property and use it as a store of wealth, and then hopefully see it rise in value. The But if you think about the kind of questions you could ask, for example, what is a good question? Like, what does it actually mean when you buy low, sell high? Well, it means that you purchase a property that has not finished its capital growth cycle. And a lot of people think that all property grows up in value. But the reality is, when you look at the data, which we will later on, you'll see that there are numerous areas in the UK which have actually suffered really heavy capital decline. So, what does it really mean? It means buying the right property in the right location, in the right area, in the right city that other people find very desirable. And if you think about the best property assets, well, these are the ones in this case for buy to let. These are the properties that renters most desire that gives you the best net cash return for your investment. That might not be a two-bedroom lifestyle apartment in a city centre, for instance. It might be a 2 or 3 bedroom house in the suburbs, for example. And then we talk about what are desirable properties, and these would be ones that the kind of person you want to have rent your property wants to rent. So demographics is a big deal here. And people, one of the good things is we've got a lot of data on this, so it's quite easy to map out how different areas appeal to different types of people. And then we have good locations, and this would be access to amenities. And there are lots of tools which you can use to identify areas where there are good local amenities. And we'll talk about that later. And then we have good attractive areas and so on. So another question is where are properties most likely to grow in value? And the answer is, of course, where people have the wealth to bid up the price of property. So therefore, the real question is, what is it about those areas that those people are drawn to? Is it work? Is it amenities? What is it? And so once you go deeper into these questions, then good answers come through. And the good thing is there's a lot of data to support all this, and therefore you can get these answers relatively easily. And then we have greatest rental demand. Where are these places? And fortunately, there's a company called PropertyData who have some very good data on this. And I'll be doing a screen share later on about this. And you'll be able to see how rental demand varies in different parts of the country and how you can zero into certain postcode districts where there is good rental demand. And then we have whys. So this is more about interrogating assumptions, or assertions. So a good assertion is typically like, here's an amazing property deal. It's going to give you gross yield 11%. Well, why is the yield so high? Then why is it? Well, because the property is cheap relative to the rent. Well, then why is the property cheap? Well, because people aren't competing to live there. Well, why do they not want to live there? Well, because it's not a really nice area. There's a lot of poverty. There's very little work. So why would somebody a good tenant want to rent this property out? Well, the answer is they probably wouldn't. And therefore, if you bought that very high yielding, very cheap property in that very bad area, you would likely have an empty property a lot of the time. And if you had a tenant in it, you'd possibly have a tenant who doesn't have the money to consistently pay their rent, which is a problem. So asking why is a really good way of interrogating assertions. And I have another one here on new build, which you can see later in the notes if you dig out the resources. So anyway, I hope you found that helpful. The main point about reasoning from first principles is that if you ask the right questions, you will find the right answers. Anyway, let's move on to the next lecture.